Okay.
All right, guys.
Gary's here. All right.
Yeah, I guess if everybody's okay, I'll just jump in. Jason, I'll just get started. If I have to let people in as we're going, we'll just jump in and get started with this.
Sounds good.
Share my screen. Give me looking around my little tripod. Awesome. So forgive me if I keep pausing. I am entered the waiting room, so let me just make sure I let everybody in. Move that over there just in case. Awesome, everybody. Well, happy New Year. I'll get started, jump in here. What I'm excited about today is that I want to take what we've been learning, want to take what we've been talking about and sort of wrap it up in a bow, and answer a bunch of questions along the way that everybody's been asking. And I'll let you know if you've asked something in the group, if you posted something, we plan to get to it. We're just weaving it into what we're doing here. I think one of the big things before I even look at this, before I even talk about this is, yeah, we're going to talk about deal making and how to get your name out there and how to get clients, and we'll talk about that. And we're going to talk about media buying. And this may sound self-serving, but it's the absolute truth. What we're doing here, what we're going over with CRO is the key to everything. That's why we spend so much time on it, not just because it's a big focus of mine. Nothing happens unless a sale is actually made, right? Nothing happens. When you're talking about media buying, for the most part, 80% of the results, and many of you have heard me say this or similar, but 80% of the results comes from what's taking place on your site and your funnels. And that's great news for everybody's here. It's the same reason if we go back to earlier calls when we started talking about the reasons why you want to be a full stack marketer. That's one of the reasons. Like people are media buy shopping, right? The average churn rate is 3 months many times. If you're really talking, sometimes even quicker. It's because, I probably had a crazy slide or something at one point before, but buying traffic is relatively easy. If you're doing it in a boat with holes, if you're pouring rocket fuel in a boat with holes, that boat's just going to sink quicker. And so most of the reason, 80% or more, why people can't scale and why people can't buy traffic is not on this side of the equation, the ad or media buying side. It's on, and I know I'm going a little bit off track here, but it's on the actual funnel side. Magic happens. When you have an offer that can convert 30% higher, all of a sudden your media buyer problems go away. Cost per acquisition drops like a rock. And so I just want to make that clear, but we will, and Brian will be sharing some awesome stuff regarding the ad side, because that's important, right? A good ad and being able to write a good ad. We look at it like a 20/80. And what's nice about all this is that regardless of where you're coming in for a position in a company, we talked about a lot of different so-called titles, whether it's CMO, whether it's full stack marketer that you're calling yourself, whether it's CRO, it all ticks by making those conversions go up. So I just wanted to make mention of that, but we're going to get to all of that, and I'll talk more about that, what's coming up towards the end of this class. So I got myself a little bit off track, but let's take a look at a quick review of what we did in the last class, what we've done in the last couple of classes, and tie it in to what we're going to be doing today, right? So, and I'll pull this a little bit out of the way so I'll be looking a little bit over there, but just so I can see it. So we talked a lot about the power of semantic separation, and you're going to learn as we go along, by the way, that also applies to ads. And you're going to be able to apply everything that we've been doing to what you're doing on the ad side for phenomenal results. But aside, we started working on a framework for semantic separation, right? We created, or you should know by now, you can create an unlimited number of high value items to test, right? That should not be a problem. When we're talking about semantic separation, we're talking about large swings. We're talking about hitting, and forgive me, I'm just letting more people in, different emotional triggers and buttons that are going to get different response. And we've learned how to break down that whole page, but we went through a framework, right? Step one, we identify all those variables, right? And we talked about this, and I'm just giving a quick repeat. Everything on a page, I say this to every client. I said it to every time we consult, everybody that's using Visiopt. Everything on a page is either increasing or decreasing conversions. 100% the data doesn't lie, right? I've talked about this. That's why you're identifying. What doesn't belong on the page is easily as important as what may or does belong on a page, right? So big mistake. A lot of marketers, we talked about this. It's follow the leader. So-and-so has it. So-and-so mentioned it in a Facebook group. This person mentioned it at the event and they know what they're talking about and they end up on pages. So we identified everything, all the variables on a page. By doing that, I also gave a checklist, which we'll keep building on. We're talking about what's missing from a page. there are many times missing components for a page that's really easy that leads to the sale, right? It could be a certain persuasive trigger. It could be social proof icons. We went through a bunch of those, but we're identifying right now. We're outlining the primary goal. Why are we doing that? Because when you start breaking things down into its pieces and we start talking, pardon me, not only about what the variable is that you're identifying, but what its goal is, we can identify A, is that the best use or option if that's the goal we're trying to accomplish for that particular variable? B, should we even be trying to accomplish that goal, or would we be better off asking another question and accomplishing a different goal, right? Everything's taking up real estate. So testing, experimentation, optimization is just all about asking yourself important questions. The difference is it's not about taking a bunch of random ideas, and I'm not picking on it because there's some brilliant groups out there, there's brilliant people out there, there's brilliant ideas that are there, but it's about giving all those ideas a framework. It's not just about randomly looking at a page and throwing this on or testing this. So that's why when identify, see what's missing, attach a goal to it, then start applying semantic separation, which can be applied to every variable, right? Every variable that's going to give you not a lot of variables for variable's sake, right? The goal isn't just to produce, look at me and this is everything we can test, but they're intelligent tests. And it's all tied back to our research. And just as a broad reminder here to bring us into today, these are all geared to finding that perfect page recipe. That's what it's all about. Now, I got a little, as you'll see, I was going to sidetrack that I wanted to share with everybody. But I think if you take an open mind and start looking, you'll start to see how understanding this sort of framework will allow you to apply different ideas, different concepts, different things that you see in a much more intelligent way. So the last thing I will say about this is, and I probably mentioned this, so this is a little bit random, it's not about somebody giving you the great idea that you have to use this opening. You have to use this word or whatever else it may be, or this style image. It's about understanding a strategy and a framework to making that actually work. I know me and Jason had a quick conversation today. This is on the media buying side. And he's working with large media buying groups that are really good at what they do. So am I. And the conversation, because I asked them a quick question, if they were doing X, Y, or Z, it doesn't really matter. But the outcome was they don't have much of a strategy. They're throwing an awful lot of ads. In fact, this evening, I have to get on a call and have them stop throwing all their ads because all they're doing with this is the account, right? Because they're just throwing so many damn ads at the account. And I only mention that not to talk about media buying. We'll talk about that in another session, but to talk about the fact that having a framework, having a strategy makes all the difference. And that's partly a large part as to how we're able to get those large swings in conversions. And again, tying this all back to everything we're going to do. You get one of your clients, regardless position, a 30% increase in sales. And that takes, instead of a single test like you saw, and like I'll show you, it takes you 4 tests, it takes you 5 tests. You've changed the bottom line of that business. You've changed their ability to scale. So at any rate, forgive me for taking a little bit too long with that. I wanted you guys to at least have an understanding. So what are we going to do in this class? How are we going to tie this up? Well, I want to bring you step 5 of the framework. Forgive me. And so there's been a number of questions that have been asked. And my goal is to answer all of these and some, right? What do we test first, right? We have all this big list. We have a funnel full of pages. Where do we actually begin and why? How do we actually begin? Question will answer, which I think and I hope will come very clear. How do we keep congruent with the initial sales message was a question that was asked, right? And it was also asked, what do we do if we don't have a lot of traffic? So that's my overarching goal today, to sort of bring this and put this into a nice bow. Before I do that, and I hope you guys will indulge me, and I hope everyone, whoops, let me let somebody else in. Forgive me. This came, and some of you may have heard this story. I thought it was kind of cool, and I thought it had a lot of lessons to what we are doing here, right? So I'll just share the story, and I'll share sort of how I broke it down. And I not only want to talk about this story, but I think it will illustrate a couple of really good points. So I don't know if any of you heard, but Payless shoe, and if you have it in your area for international, it's really an inexpensive, looked at as like a low end, $20 to $40 shoe, men and women's, but primarily women's shoes, like a discount shoe brand. And they did an experiment I thought was pretty cool. They wanted to challenge the perception of value and branding in the fashion world. So they created a complete fictional luxury brand, Paylessy, and I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but made it sound, I guess, a little bit fancy. They did an elaborate setup. They did a chic style pop-up store in Los Angeles. They put these, fancy sculptures, sleek displays. They put a fancy staff of sales associates, made them look on the outside completely different. And they invited to this opening prominent fashion influencers. Now, I said this previously, but I'll hit this again. They're normally selling for $20 to $40 so what they're normally selling, forgive me, as $20 to $40 their shoes. They're positioning all of these as high-end designer footwear. To be very clear, this is the exact same shoes that are in the store down the street. There's no difference in the merchandise at all. And so influencers were drawn in like they are by the sophisticated environment, the branding. They start praising the luxury designs, describing them as elegant, worth hundreds of dollars. Some of them paid as much as $600 for these shoes that, again, were $20 to $40, right? They didn't pull the wool over their eyes at the end of the experiment. They told everyone and all these influencers what they were really buying. They gave them all their money back, but they were shocked, right? To find out that what was really happening here was they were praising and going overboard for a $20 shoe. They were paying $600 for a $20 shoe, which is really, really interesting, right? And so I think that what we're going to learn from these lessons is then how it applies to us. It's not about it's not about creating stunt. It's not about selling a bad product as a good product. That's not the lesson here. It's that the perceived value of everything we're selling, whether it's an info product, whether it's an e-commerce brand, whether it's in the financial space or other, it's all about, I shouldn't say all, let me take that back. A part of it, because we learned that, is about the perceived value of a product, right? It's about its story. It's about the context. It's about a bad word and direct response, branding, right? Then the actual product itself. Every one of these so-called fashion influencers, I can guarantee you would never walk into a Payless store and be able to say, wow, this is beautiful, right? They treat them like that they were trash. So what are some lessons, and this is where I love this, that we can apply, and how does this apply to semantic separation? How does it apply to everything we're talking about? Well, I think from a higher level, we've said everything that is on a page is either contributing or taking away from conversions, right? Everything. And so if we understand that perceived value drives conversions, right? So we are many times, when you're the guy throwing too much on a page or the wrong stuff on a page, and we're figuring out this perfect page recipe, many times we're driving lower perceived value and not higher. Is our discount, our anchoring, is it creating a higher perceived value or a lower perceived value for the exact same product? So everything on a page increases or decreasing, right? Presentation and context matters. And we're going to tie this directly into specifically like what you can test, but I just wanted there, right? They created this environment, right? Well, you know, the fancy statues, the high-end salespeople, the name of the brand, right? Well, when we're talking about designing high converting landing pages, that turns into premium visuals versus what I see all over the place looking like stock, right? Professional layouts. I'm calling, and I'm not saying, somebody will show me that it's crushing it and it's not like the death of, right? Anything, but I call BS on ugly pages. I think that we are beyond that from a level of sophistication in the market. I believe that what it looks like, the pieces that go into it, and this isn't all about design, right? Is with market sophistication is something that we have to consider, right? What is your audience looking at? What are they used to? How do you position yourself as the premium version of that and not the discount version? And so I think that, I mean, it's much easier for us as marketers, for our offers, for our clients' offers, to change that context than it was to do what they did. And all of it is testable. And so I just jotted a few examples, but it literally has to do with everything, right? What testimonials we're using, what trust badges, are we using scarcity tactics in a ethical and real way to enhance perceived value? And I'll tie in some more examples of this that from some small businesses that are crushing it with some of these ideas. So social proof was another lesson, right? We know about this. We know about the huge surge in user-generated content, UGC, right? From influencers. We know that that is at our disposal. Heck, we know, and this is the difference for a different class, we talk about it in the AI masterminds, that you don't even need real influencers. There's AI influencers. You need to be careful on how you do it. But the point is here, we can leverage influencers. We can leverage endorsements. We can leverage social proof. We can increase our own celebrity and our own brand celebrity in not only customer reviews, testimonials, case studies, but as we talk about, where are they placed? How are they placed? Not just randomly throwing them at a wall and throwing something out that doesn't meet your ideal customer's needs, right? They were able to drive through emotional triggers, right? We talked about this when we were talking about semantic separation. One of the categories, only one, we went through, I don't remember the number, we went through about 15 different categories. But one of them was emotional triggers. And I shared an example of a client, and all they did was I shouldn't say all, they took their headline, They took their top 10 emotions that they thought were triggers, and they wrote a different headline for each emotional trigger. Now, you can do a lot more than that, but it goes to show emotional. They didn't buy based upon value in this Payless experiment. It's the same shoe, right? Where we're talking, what made a $20 shoe down the street worth a $600 shoe here? I think that it's just a lesson, right, to bring this vividly to life. And this is only one example as to how much of a difference this has, not only with me talking, not only with me giving case studies and examples, but that you can see just in life in the real world. So again, the influencers created excitement. There was an emotional reaction that people followed and were willing to spend more, right? So again, how does this come down? Copy, visuals that evoke the emotions, desire, urgency, trust, and a lot of other emotions that we've all talked about, that we talked about we have to test, right? I think it shows us the value of testing, right? Just like they were able to do a test down the street, which was for a whole different other reasons. They were trying to show, I guess in their own way, the sort of that you can get the exact same or higher quality in the fashion world without, that there's a lot of what would the wording be? That there's a lot of, I'll just use my own lowbrow, a lot of baloney, right, in the fashion world and in a lot of worlds, right, as to what really makes something worth a $600 expensive fashion brand versus the other of the same product. There is pricing psychology that we can look with, right? Just at the top, anchoring, showing a higher price, right, to make it actually feel more. That isn't lying. Hopefully you're anchoring it to something of real value. I'll just tell you, by the way, that's one type of test if your client doesn't have. I know where a lot of us will use to long form, but even short form and others, anchor that price. If you're giving a low ticket front end, anchor that price. Do not let your market guess as to what that's worth, and playing with that anchoring as a side note as to what that is can make a huge difference. You would think the bigger you go, the better, but at a certain point, they're going to call BS. So you need to play with that, but it's a testable item, right? Brand positioning. How does this fill in? We talked about this. Benefits, features, dimensionalization in a way that aligns with your audience, what your audience values most, which if you recall, part of it, one of our identification was, what are all of their value propositions? And I'm going to remind everybody, we don't actually know. We know we have ideas, we do research, we've worked in the markets, but it's like, what? What are the specifics that's going to make this happen, right? I do want to make clear, and so I added this, and I think that this is, I hope this is valued by the way for people. We're not talking about just perception. I mean, all of us here are hopefully working with companies that are doing real things and selling real products. So I know it goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyways, right? We want to align that perception to reality, right? Our goal is not to ever deceive. And when I talk about testing, it isn't to deceive or make stuff up, right? It's to help a good product that you truly believe the market deserves and needs, sell more of. And that's what we're all here. So I wanted to make the point that this is easier online. And I'm going to walk through this, and I'm going to give specifics, and I'll try to go through this real quick. But I wanted to talk about, like, okay, we went through a lot of other stuff. What we're basically doing here is creating a perceived value checklist, right? We talked about all the things that you can test, can and should test. We talked about leaning into emotion and figuring out these perfect page recipes. Let's tie this into what you could potentially be testing on your site. And I'll run through this, and hopefully all make sense and all clear. So, right? I don't normally lean into testing design, but there's design elements. A side note, I'll show you when we do the VisuOp demo. If you do want to test design, I never recommend usually creating 3 different designs. You can test your way to a design, but the main point here is design and design elements are going to give the impression, credibility, and quality. And if you don't think that's true, if we're still living in the days of, the ugly site, yes, sometimes because it's different, right? We say different better than good. So sometimes that different is better than better type of thing, but sometimes it doesn't. Just like the days of the genius Dan Kennedy, and with the whole thing in info products was to put that lump and that thud on your desk, and now it's the exact opposite, right? People will run from that. They want quick, biteable, size things. So things change, but everything that is on the website. So let's not look at this like we are. We'll let a couple people in. Let's not just look at this as if it's a whole website design. It's about what is there that shouldn't be and what's not there that should be there. And what can we change? Everything from trust logos to symbols that you're putting on there, to a phone number versus a not phone number, to which testimonials you choose and how do you display them, and more, right? Considering your page being a hierarchical style, right, from top to bottom, a lot of things that can go in there. Talk about this. What is this? High quality imagery, right? Use professional photos. Use, UGC, the opposite side of that, authentic. But I can't tell you, and I don't know what you guys have found, and I've mentioned this previously. I can pretty much, I don't like the word guarantee, but I'll pretty much guarantee most of the funnels that are done on long form and others, a lot, I'll say it this way, of the images are thrown in there an afterthought. I can tell you they make an enormous difference. From a semantic separation standpoint, we talked about, right? Are they happy or are they sad? Are they enjoying your product or are they feeling the pain? Is there a before or after, like we were talking about with Nathan's page before, right? To really bring that sort of like the Billy Mays style demo. Photos, imagery is going to make a big difference. I already said mixed with authenticity. If we want and it's appropriate, we can put on our sites and test luxury aesthetics, right? I won't look in there. I usually do not test colors, fonts, and layouts that much, but you can, depending on what you're selling. And it is worthwhile. I may have shared a story during this call. I'm during one of these calls, but I'll repeat it here just to illustrate this about a client that uses Visiopt. He's an agency. And I'm not recommending, by the way, everybody run out and test this, but he created 20 different or something crazy like that, logos done with AI. If anybody's seen AI logos, they're, in my opinion, somebody who tends to be visual, absolutely horrible, and got like between a 20 to 32% increase in actual conversions from the logo. I don't say that to test logos. I do it to illustrate this point, how you're showing it, where you're showing it. Something I probably may even have somewhere else in here from conversion. I'll just throw this out here. If it's further, how much white space you have on a page. By the way, that was done, gosh, decades ago. There were studies done. And too much pages, meaning give your site space to breathe. And I probably have some examples, but I wanted to be aware. Consistent branding, something that isn't even thought of many times in direct response, right? Or it helps, I will tell you, to use consistent branding across. It helps to use similar colors in your ads that you may be using on your pages so people get to know your brand, right? To pick, these are really easy to test. Okay, I did have white space. So I'll just say something here and I'll give you an example of one thing, right? That may help you when you're looking at a page, just to give you an idea that literally everything on a page can and will. So how does this apply to the luxury aesthetic? Well, sometimes everybody's trying to cram everything in the above the fold, which can be useful. But here's some things, right? When you have more white space. Couple of quick studies I pulled up. Wichita State University, increasing white space improves readability and directs the user attention to the CTAs directly, contributing to higher conversion rates. One study. A study highlighted by Smashing Magazine found that effective use of white space between paragraphs in the left and right margins, so basically throughout the page, in and around the images, increased comprehension by about 20%, adding to a more engaging user experience. Well, people consume your content, they are going to buy more. I'll let you know, by the way, before I even go, I think I have one more example here, and this wasn't designed to be about white space. It's designed to show you that everything that we learned previously about everything that's on a page actually applies. And how does this apply to the story that we just discussed? Because everything applies. Here's what happens in the mind subconsciously. Make a decision whether this page looks difficult or easy. Think about that. In other words, if it is people are lazy, we're in a quick grab them market. We talked about, and there'll be more in here, probably the 3-second rule, right? And I'll show that as we go through today. But the real thing is, like, does your page, before they read a word, does it look and feel difficult? And that doesn't mean you need a short page. This applies to everything, long form and other. Is your eye inviting? And so that's part of the page recipe. It's just another component to say, why are we testing everything that's on a page? Because again, it's not about just the headline. It's about the combination of all the variables and what's there and what's not there. So here was another one. Landing pages with strategic white space around the CTAs can experience an average of 20% increase in conversions, underscoring the importance of design simplicity and guiding user action. So there's something that we haven't talked about yet during this class because it's more about messaging, but you need a guide. Where do you want them looking? Right? Simple tricks that we've all heard of before. Is your image, your hero image, looking straight ahead? Or is it guiding? Are the eyes looking towards the CTA? Are you, as you're going down the page, and I use Apple as the sort of, I don't know what the word would be, but like the ultimate, they're really smart at doing their visuals. But the point is, are the visuals enhancing what's actually in that paragraph, or are they just randomly thrown? Are the images taking and telling you a story? Captions to the images telling you a story. All of this compounds and makes big differences in conversions, right? And we've seen that 30% to 400%, right? Social proof, we talked about this, so I'll just quickly. Testimonials and reviews, influencer endorsements, case studies, UGC, but it is not just about randomly saying, here is a checklist, good. It's about thinking about and asking the right questions. What's its purpose? Is the purpose of the testimonial or review to back up a claim? Is it to offset an objection so that it feels like your page, whether it be long copy, whether it be a VSL, whether it be regardless an e-commerce page, whether it's an info product, it does not matter. Is that now answering an invisible objection so that psychologically you feel that they get me? and I think I've talked about this before, but I'm going to throw these in so people get them again. It's not just about testimonials, right? It's about which testimonial, where the testimonial is, do you have a headline to the testimonial or not, which I usually outperforms. I recommend you testing that. What is the headline to that testimonial, right? All of these things, what do they look like, et cetera, all are going to matter. So this is what we're learning from just a simple thing of under the word here. All we're looking at here, just for the record, is perceived value. It's tying into the story that we just went through. Trust building elements, trust badges, certificates, certifications, security seals, industry awards, right? I know clients that they're leaning heavily into this. There are people that are selling almost with no copy, and I don't recommend this, in very competitive markets, almost exclusively by testimonial trust. And a good offer, just for the record. So will these make a difference? Yeah, on the page, off the page, and we'll get to that. Guarantees and warranties, transparent policies, expertise indicated as seen in, legitimate as seen in, featured on logos, media coverage. These can all backfire, by the way, and everything, just so you know, I'm not saying, I want to make this clear. We talked about this from day one. This is not about checklists. This is the opposite of checklist. I've seen people use these things, and if they were to do what I have called the great invisibility experiment, right? It's there, now it's not there. Biggest semantic separation you can have, right? It's on the page, and now it's not on the page. You're going to get a different response because they're putting the wrong things, or they're clearly fake, and people just become, dead and immune to them. So let's just go through exclusivity and scarcity, the limited time offers, countdown timers, deadlines. This can be done legitimately. I'm not saying we put false crap scarcity, that we're in it for the long term. Low stock notifications, membership programs, pre-orders and wait lists. God, we could keep brainstorming these bonus stacks that continue to disappear and go away. And I don't know during his class, but Jason has this campaign, or does campaigns in a way that is a genius at doing some of this in your ongoing email campaigns that maybe you'll talk about when you talk. But all of this stuff can be applied not only on page, which is what we're talking about now, but once you learn and test, you can apply them in other locations. But all of this stuff done in the right way, right? I will never give ever a checklist for checklist's sake. And I am not giving you a technique or posting something on a group that says, you do this. I get this asked all the time when I've spoken. I get this, I've spoken at high-end masterminds and other things on stage, and what are the top 3 things? It differs for 2 companies in the exact same industry, which is what we learned about here. I would very rarely tell somebody, put this on your page, and it's going to increase conversion. And if we want a sign of follow the leader, and I am not picking on this company because it does work some of the time, but it was like those proof pop-ups. And again, at all, making very clear, not at all downing or saying, I think what they came out with as a tool was genius. But we've seen it decrease conversions as much as we've seen it increase conversions. Differs from offer to offer, even in the same thing. We've seen it get a 20% increase just by removing it. Because depending on who your audience is, depending on the sophistication of your audience, depending on what they are seeing and seeing to them, and I'm just making assumptions as to why, it may be complete BS. At a certain point, we talked about this, AI words, other words, following the leader really have a detrimental effect, which is why we have the blind following the blind. So just as a side note there, that is really important. I'm going to share a quick, I promise, because I'll get into what I promised today. But I thought this was another real cool story that was on the news, on the national news. I don't remember how I saw it, but at any rate, there was this monthly pop-up pizzeria in Chicago that sells exclusive limited edition thin crust pizzas. They are in an alley, and I mean a crap alley. If you didn't know the area, you probably wouldn't drive down there, right? Unless somebody told you. They're behind a garage, and you can't even come in unless you make online reservations to secure one of only 12 pies that they make off per month. Now, they're doing it for charity, but the lesson is the same, right? I thought this was just another cool story. The pizzas are priced over $100 each. All the proceeds go to charity. That's why they're doing it. They've raised $80,000 for Chicago-based charities. Aside from this being a really, really cool story that I thought was awesome. But ask yourself how many restaurants and others, now granted, we can make a case that, well, it's all about charity and I think it's more about the exclusivity. It's how they position themselves. It ties back into the same concept or idea that Payless did, right? Their pizzas sell out. So what's the lessons that we can get out of there? They have limited supply, right? If you have limited inventory, time-sensitive offers, we talked, there's ways to legitimately manufacture perceived value, exclusivity, and scarcity. Customers feel part, they're knowing there are a select few who can experience this. We've seen this, by the way, I'm sure you guys have dozens of examples, but there are kids. So I age myself when I say kids that will launch limited edition clothing, t-shirts, we've all seen it, right? And because they make it available and they build the hype around it, and to me, a lot of those shirts look like nothing, maybe it's just me. The point, that isn't the point. They are selling millions of dollars worth of a t-shirt that we could all get printed. I'm not saying, by the way, what they're selling is high quality, but exclusivity, access, creates prestige. People want to be part of something. Ask yourself, how can we test these things? Story, they have a story behind it, right? You can have a backstory. Your brand can have, I know branding is looked at a negative word. We had a client where really the second as part of, after we got the hook and problem, really went into the story behind the founder and why he's doing this. But it was tied in. Here's the key. The story should be a conversion story, not a story for the benefit of the company. Look at me, right? But the point is, story amplifies exclusivity. Price anchoring, right? It's perceived value. We don't have to be the lowest price. I'm certain that they could go out, especially in Chicago, and get pizzas for a lot less than $100 for what looked like a thin pie, right? You can create charitable giving. This is something we're doing with a couple of clients. I've seen it done multiple times before. Side note, I have a client that was in the, of all things, the cat space. They donated, I don't even want to know how many thousands of pounds of cat food to shelters as part of their business. They not only do good for the sake of doing good because they truly want to, but that appeal, they're making a fortune. So you can look at it, right? These are just we're learning from, and the goal here is a couple of cool stories. How can we apply these and test these, right? Psychological pricing can be applied, right? This is a whole different area that we could probably talk about in testing for weeks, right? We talked about anchor pricing, bundle discounts, tiered options, decoy pricing, right? I'm not going to get into that really right now, but the point is that there's a lot of ways to present that offer. And I don't care what kind of offer it is, long form, VSL, et cetera. Anybody who's writing copy understands that the way you're presenting or what you're presenting can make a big difference. These are just the stories we're learning how some people in small little things are applying this in the offline world. So it becomes very visceral to all of us. Emotional appeal, we talked about this, right? Storytelling, aspirational messages, personalization if you can. They're able to visualize the benefits. Product differentiation we talked about, right? So I'm just going to fly through this. USP, how is our product different? That should seed through everything we're testing. Everything, through what your funnel looks like to what you're doing. Different is better, right, than better. And it just holds true. Enhanced features, detailed descriptions. I'm just going to scan through this community support. So I got a little bit sidetracked when I was putting together what I wanted to teach and present, because I thought that these stories were both very, very cool. And I thought it would be unique, interesting, and maybe help bring to life some of what we're talking about when we see how these can be applied offline and what a big, big difference it is. And so I'm going to just sum this part of it up, is that we have a much easier time, a much easier way to test all of these things than they do, right? If a pizza place behind in an alley can perceive themselves as high value, and I've seen other restaurants and other pop-ups do this, and they can get reservations months in advance and everybody talking about them. And I'm not saying we're going to do a stunt, right? And if Payless selling $20 and $40 shoes can present and have influencers buying and all over the place talking about it as a $600 shoe, just start to think. Now, these are just in two areas that we talked about: perceived value and exclusivity. If you go back to the previous classes and start applying everything else that we talked about, these are just two channels from testing that can improve your conversions. If we go back and we talk about, emotions and different headlines and messaging and value propositions and everything else that we've talked about and building on social proof, all of this just multiplies. So I'll stop there for a second. With that, I hope people found it as interesting as I did. I'll let Brian or Jason, if you guys have anything that you want to add to that. I know you didn't know I was sharing those stories, so I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you had anything you'd love to add, I wanted to take a pause for a second.
Yeah, you're good. It makes me feel like I'm a dinosaur, to be honest, everything you're telling me to test, because I really only normally test headlines and I test leads a lot, and then just something like radicals, offer versus offer. So out of my top three, I'd say those are the things I normally test. But you're giving me, hundreds of things potentially to test between semantic separation and all the messaging, and then even pricing is something I'm interested in. If you have insights into that in a little bit, um,
Yeah.
testing pricing and whatnot, because that's something you read a lot about, but I haven't done any of it to be honest myself. Like I said, I stick to pretty much those three.
What I'll do is I will add some of that pricing to the next class, because I think we can take like maybe 15 minutes together. So we're there, all of us, and we can talk about like how we can test pricing. And let's also remember, on the note of pricing, and again, forgive me because I don't like to make generalities, but most of the time pricing is follow the leader. and pricing is sort of arbitrarily pulled out of somebody's, forgive me, butt at a meeting sometime or there, and how much can we get at there? And there's two sides to pricing that we all know about, right? There is, am I underpricing? And many times in certain markets, that ties into perceived value. And so there's the one side, just taking a broad approach to this right now, that skepticism builds in because you're giving me something and it's too cheap. And why are you discount offer? Sometimes we see that you attract a better quality customer and even higher conversions at a higher price. When we first started this years ago, and I'm not going to age myself by giving clear, but we were manufacturing fitness equipment, actual physical equipment. We were competing with companies like Total Gym. And before I knew what the heck I was doing, and we did a test and found out that we had been giving away $100 per gym for years, right? You start crying when you start realizing what you do. So there's all kinds of things, right? Is it a $7 front end? And if so, do we apply proper reason why, right? There's so many pieces to it. Or is it an e-commerce style product? And do we want to be positioned as the discount, which usually is everybody's default? Or do we want to be presented as, like we talked about here, high-end perceived value? Do we want to be high-end perceived value with a really, really good reason why, right? There's a lot of levers that we can push there. And for all the copywriters on the call, you also know that in your long form, right, the wind up to the close or the beginning of the close, depending on how you look at it, usually positions yourself for the close when it comes to pricing, right? I know at least, like I'll give you in the supplement space, for example, if you are seeding through the copy, I guess some people would call it priming, six bottle, six bottle, six bottle, and that's what you're showing visually. You're going to sell more six bottle, right? You're going to sell. So there's a lot of things that we can talk about and that you can both on a short form and a long form, and it can be even applied to e-commerce. So yeah, I love that. I love it. But I hope people found the story interesting. So what I'll do, so I don't run out of time here, is what I want to talk about now back on track, right? To semantic separation, to how do we decide what to test? And it's something we call design of experiment. And I'm going to let you know before I even dive into this, it's just the fact, it's always a combination of art and science. So I'm going to tell you and walk you through how we approach it. And we'll go through. Let's just see what we got here. So we're going to do a step-by-step guide, prioritize and apply test inputs generated from our semantic separation exercises. That's what we talked about. I'm going to first start at the real simple, and some of this is real simple. I get asked this all the time, right? Where do we start? We call it top-down, front-back. You have a funnel. Where do we start? Almost always, there's a different method. There's only two that we look at. Almost always is top-down, front-back. And the reason for that is very, very simple. Number one, we looked at before, and I think I've given a few examples of this, of what we call ripple effect. We know now, everyone here knows that what we test over here at the beginning of the funnel can and will affect every single page throughout the funnel. I was talking with a large agency yesterday. All their testing is on bounce pages. That's all they're doing. They really have no understanding of what is actually going on down funnel. And we've showed examples, right, that we can get an increase in front-end conversions, but many, many times a decrease in actual sales volume. And it just doesn't matter whether you have a webinar on the back end. It doesn't matter whether you just have regular upsells. It doesn't matter if in their case everything was high ticket and it's going back to a sales call center. You can't eat click-throughs. You can't eat opt-ins. So simple thing is knowing that, where are we going to get the most impact? And so it's a front-back approach, almost always, and a top-down. We're going to start at above the fold and work our way down. Now, there are exceptions to that, right? There are, as we are doing our analysis that we did previously, they're hiding the lead, and it's clearly, right? So we're going to pull something from down here and move it up here. There's going to be obvious, like I have it playing out, big sections that are all about them that, you're asking yourself questions, by the way. I'm going to back up for a sec. Everything that we've given to you, everything that you're doing, everything about optimization is now asking questions, right? We talked about what is the purpose of this variable, right? We identified. Is it there? Should it be there? Could something else do it better? That's all experimentation is. But it's not just asking questions randomly, right? It's asking with framework. So simply put, the first thing that we do is a top-down, front-back approach. All other things being equal, I would start at the first page of the funnel and the top of the fold. That's where I would always start. And it's where we're always going to, I should say, most of the time, get the best results. And we will work ourselves throughout that page. We will work ourselves then from page to page to page through the funnel, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But you are going, in some of the examples that I've shown in the couple of site reviews we've done, that have done so far, you've seen that just at top of fold, how many possible tests you could be running just pop a fold. So we'll discuss that. We'll also, people have asked for, and we'll give a demo of Visiop, and I'll show you how you can test a lot of that stuff significantly faster. But item number one, let's keep this simple. Top down, front, back approach. So what's the second, right? So we talked about, I just want to make sure, ripple effect priorities. What I mean by priorities is when you are asking yourself questions about the variables, right? What's missing and what should be there should start popping out at you. So we may have 200 different possible headlines. We're never going to touch 200 headlines. We're going to pick, based upon the research that we did, the highest priority variable, and then work our way down, and usually do multiple, at the same time, right? So we also are looking at, we talked about, and this can come into we discussed this in an earlier class, probably class number 2, where I went deep, like what is a test and what isn't a test. So the amount of, or what we call the velocity of conversions, is going to come into this as well, right? We're going to talk about this some more, but some of the questions that come up are, well, what if they don't have a lot of traffic? I mean, we talked about this, so I can always circle back. I don't want to spend too much time on this today, and I gave examples, but the number of eyeballs in each experiment and the velocity of conversions is going to make a big difference on what you're going to choose to test. But without complicating this at all right now, top, bottom, front, back, nice and easy. The second thing we talk about is plugging the holes. And this is what people ask me all the time and what we approach, but I'm going to give you a couple of cautions and why this doesn't come up much. You will approach a client or your own offer, and you'll say, man, upsell one sucks, right? The uptake rate should be significantly better. And I know that if I go in and I play with upsell one, which typically we all know has there are other ways to increase AOV, but one of the biggest drivers of AOV in a funnel, because there's drop off after, right? Second, third, upsell typically have less impact. I'm going to dive in there. Well, there's a couple of major problems with that. So we do this from time to time, but there's considerations to take place. Most of the time, there is not of front-end sales that are coming through a funnel, even with somebody with volume, to make it worth you starting there, right? We have clients that are doing a lot of volume, but consider what we talked about previously, right? You're going to want on every tested version, and hopefully you're going to want to be able to do this with a tool like Visio where you can test more than just one. But let's just forget about that for a minute. Let's just take a simple headline test, right? Which I'd argue, again, we talked about the importance of the entire page recipe, not just headline 1 versus headline 2, but let's just for now, just talk about that. You're going to want 600 or better eyeballs minimum, right? It can be done as low as 3. And you're going to want a certain differentiation, right? Velocity of conversions between the control and the variation, which typically isn't going to happen just from a headline test. So what am I saying here? I'm saying that, yes, you have clients that clearly have an issue on upsell one. You are still better, much better off starting at front of funnel and working your way back to increase the velocity of conversions first, because that is also going to affect almost always the uptake rate of all the upsells, either positively or negatively throughout the entire funnel. And it's very difficult to jump in and to do that. So what do people do? What do big companies do that I see doing? Well, they'll turn and they'll just run two against each other and they'll go with their gut. Well, we've talked about our gut before and how often it's wrong, right? I gave you the example, I believe it was last class, my client that still wants his gut to be right, even after all the data showed his gut was wrong, right? We've been in there. So that's why, yes, you can plug the holes and people will talk about this and let's look at the analytics. And by the way, Visio makes it really easy to see. Most of the time, we fix this by starting over here first. I gave one example, but I'll just bring this back. A case study example that we talked about when we were inside of Visio that showed a pre-sale page resulting in a 90% increase in actual sales. Not click-throughs, actual sales. So that's that ripple effect. So two methods, if I just want, and we're going to make this all make sense, and we're going to actually work through something, but I just want to make clear, it's going to sound dead simple. Shouldn't it be much more complicated? No. Top down, front back, occasionally plug the holes. But first, I want enough volume and velocity of conversions going through the funnel because the laws of statistical significance aren't going to change. And so why start? And I'm going to answer another question that nobody asked, but it just popped in my head here. So let me just, one more page. I just want to make a note so I can make this clear. So we're going to start at the front and work our way back, because to leave a test going till you get enough data because you think there's a hole, right? We all know, and I don't know who to credit this to, but it definitely isn't my words, but money is attracted to speed. That's the goal here, right? Getting in and out of tests and learning fast. That's what we're always about. Some people have brought up a question that nobody asked, but I'm going to answer it anyways because we get asked it. You do not. Visio has the ability to do what I'm about to tell you. So from a functional standpoint, you can test multiple pages throughout the funnel at the same time, functionally. I will tell you I would never. So functionally, we can do that without issue. Ever recommend that. One page at a time in a funnel. And I'm going to explain why. We talked about in an earlier class, noise in an experiment. And I'll just give everybody a quick reminder, right? Noise is day of week. Noise can be time of day. Noise can be a political event. Noise can be a weather event that is going to create changes or swings potentially in your experiment. By the way, the same thing happens on the ad side, the exact same thing. You should be aware of it. So noise can be created by a lot of things. If we're testing multiple pages on the page, we're affecting everything. We're creating a ton of noise. If we have a test running on the front, and then we're also testing an upsells, it's like which version with which version. You're creating noise that you don't even know about. So you have the technical ability to do that with VisioOpt? Absolutely. I always cringe when companies do it because for the reasons that I said, I would rather see you go front back, put a real test in place, get results for actual sales, move on to the next test. Money's attracted to speed. When you either get enough front end volume, then you move to upsell one. And if I hear the but it's so important. Yeah, but your client doesn't get enough conversions to make it worth you testing, right? And I can tell you without exception, swapping out upsell one versus another upsell one and thinking that you just got a big difference because you get a swing when you get, I'm throwing out a really low number, 100 conversions is not a test. Because as we learned and as we saw, and I believe that, like I think both Jason and Ryan early on in this class, I think class one, confirmed the same thing where, using a video tool, it looks like you have a winner and then it flips. So what good does it do you to test upsell one because somebody told you that's the most important place to test when you really truly can't get to a statistical real answer for them. And all you're doing is creating that strand of spaghetti or yarn. I have to come up with a better analogy, a twisted rope that you can't untie, right? Because you really don't know. You start making assumptions. And this is what happens. And then we talked about this a lot and a lot of different things that cause this, but you see the ups and downs when you go to real traffic. So,
Scott, can
yes.
I just have a real quick question for you. So you've mentioned testing things, and one example you gave was having different styles of headlines or different emotions based headlines. And I'm thinking of like the old school blue blockers where the whole campaign was new technology hook and angle versus maybe the natural cures they don't want you to know about, which is like a shocking secret that they don't want you to know about. And if your whole angle is one and you test a headline with a completely different motivation and it ends up working better, do you have to go through and rewrite your whole sales page, your whole funnel at that time? What do you do when the
That is
test doesn't conform with what the rest of the angle is?
I'm going to talk about that's a really good question, and I'm going to talk about that specifically during this class because it's you're not the first to ask that question. So I'm going to give you a higher level overview as to how we do it, and I'll show you with an example as we continue through today's class. But really good. So first of all, I don't find that it is as much a problem as most people think, right? It just isn't, and I'll show you why with a real example. And secondly, you can test in segments of the page. The third part of the question was, okay, I learned, and this is my wording, not yours, so you can feel free to correct me. But at a higher level, what I think you're saying is, we learned this about our market. What do we do next? Well, if we learned a hook, an angle, an emotion, a psychological trigger, wherever that learning may come from, I'm looking to apply that, not globally. I'm looking to test applying that in different areas, including but not limited to what's taking place. Whoop, you let somebody in, forgive me. Including but not limited to the ads, giving it to the media buyers, or if you were directing it, in addition to customer support and everything. So I'll go through that with an example that I think would make this very clear. There's a combination of an art and a science to it, but you definitely want to test that above the fold and not worry so much about congruency. I believe Kelvin asked that in a different way as well. And so I'm going to address all of that today. It's a really, really good question. And I think we have some strategies for you to accomplish that. But at a higher level, the simple answer is, if I learn something about the market through testing, that old adage, the forest through the trees, and heck, using your example, I shouldn't be over here in the natural cure forest. I'm doing significantly better in the high tech forest. Then I'm going to start with my same principles of top down, front back, testing that in various areas. The other thing is, it has to make sense, of course. So this may not make sense right now, but meaning your page and your funnels have to make sense by your front and back, but they do not have to be as 100% congruent as people think or say that they do. And I'll show you this as we go through this. Again, I'm using this because I was just on a call yesterday and they're doing all high ticket, and all they're doing is trying to get their ads dialed in, and all they have access to is Unbounce. And they realize that all they're limited to doing is taking what they're learning in on the ads and applying it to landing page. And so the so-called experts will say, yeah, if you have a headline here, use the headline on the page. Maybe. I've seen if somebody's doing that, almost always can outperform. People aren't looking for the identical. They're looking for identical. They're looking for congruent themes is what I guess I would say. You can't be talking about blue widgets over here and show them a page about red widgets. So that's a really, really good question. I gave you probably a confusing overview, but as we go through this, Nathan, honestly, let me know if I've answered that question as I go through this or not. So I'll do my best to come back to that. It's a really, really good question. And I think we're going to be able to cover that. So I'm going to just go through and we're going to talk about the steps for this. I'm going to talk about some of these really quickly because I want to get to a lot of it was, Nathan's question, right? How do we do this? So we know that we are grouping things by category, right? Headline, subheads, body copy, CTAs, the visual elements, the trust elements, the proof elements, pricing and offers, engagement tools, urgency and scarcity. We knew that from the last class, right? We knew that we can group them. I gave a number of different Excel-based checklists as to why you're doing them, and we start to go in. So what I'm going to do is walk this through, and I'm going to give a disclaimer here first. I picked on a site that just popped up in my feed. I don't know who owns this site. They appear to be doing very well. So if they ever see this or listen to this, nothing I'm about to say is a negative or on their site at all. It's just how we would break apart or approach testing, right? For something that is really running in the wild. And if they ever get a chance to see this, I would recommend that they begin a test. And I thought maybe this is a way for us to design a test together and figure this out. So I came across this particular site. They're sending cold traffic to it. And what I'm doing here, in addition to what we said above, and this is just above the fold, is I'm identifying the variables. Remember, we just said top down that are located or not located above the fold. Now, I didn't go through for this particular thing all our research or the full categorization. I'm showing you how we can do this super fast, right? Why do I block here? Well, there's nothing here. First of all, look how much space they're taking up before they get to anything. Secondly, I can add a phone number for trust. You don't even have anybody man it. The amount of people they're going to call it are going to be slim to none. We could test other test items there, right? Here's another blank. Well, there's no pre-head there. This is the headline. There's no real subhead that can be added. This is paragraph 1, CTA. There's a different CTA, which we'll talk about. There's an image, right? That's how we're identifying it. And so what we're doing is we're documenting each variation that we did previously. We're documenting the control. We're documenting our semantic separation versions and the goal of each version. I provided, again, a spreadsheet last time. You can be as formal or informal as you want. Let you know, like I'm giving there, you can put it on a simple Google Doc if you want, right? And identify it. If you really want to have for your whole team, spreadsheet's really nice because now you have a game plan that you can follow whenever you're approaching this and you get data from your first test. So step 1, nice and easy. Okay. Let's go up to the top here, forgive me. We're prioritizing, right? I just want to, we talked about top down, but at some point we have to prioritize the variables, right? So in this case, above the fold content, right? Ensure the page immediately answers, and I'm going to give you a couple of, it's all in my mind about frameworks. So what questions do you want to answer? Why am I here, right? So what can I do here? And why should I do it with you? You've heard me say that before. Simple. I am sure 100% I never made those words up, right? I'm sure I heard it somewhere along the line. But you need to answer these questions in 3 seconds, right? You really have seconds for people to know. Watch your bounce rates. Watch what really happens, and you'll see why this makes a difference. So what are the items that answer those questions? We test whether a pre-head headline should be there. What should it be? The headline, the hero image, does it clearly convey the value or the purpose of the page, right? Does it, we can evaluate the clarity of the message. Remember I said, figuring out what you want to test is all about asking yourself intelligent questions, not randomly, but within the framework that we talked about. We have all of these variables. Why am I here? Is that answered? What can I do here? Now, it's going to fall throughout. It's not just the CTAs, but the CTAs, do they tell me, what can I do here? Is there visual hierarchy, right? Where does the eye go? Is the CTA immediately noticeable? What do you first see? No, this isn't about testing button colors. That is not what anything in this class has been about, but you do want to evaluate. We talked about the value of white space. Where does your eye go? Do a little experiment. Right? Have your wife, spouse, significant other, friends, just take a look at it. What do you see first? What's this page about? Take it away. You don't have to do this, but this is like questions you want to start asking yourself if you're asking like, where should we get started? It amazes me, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but it's still, you have to guess it does amaze me that smart marketers, great companies, like they forget about this and they assume that everybody's going to consume your content. Even if you have VSL, which we'll talk about in one of the upcoming classes. a VSL page, you still want them to accomplish a certain thing. And in order for them to accomplish that thing, they have to know why they're there and what they think you're going to promise on the other side, because they're paying with their time or they're paying with their email. And we all know about this, right? Especially in today's world, there's an expense to everything, right? Color contrast, ensure the primary. By the way, I'll make a side note about it. I never believe in testing color, except you'll have clients that love their brand and fall in love with their brand and their brand colors. And so obviously the old, does the CTA pop is still a rule. And so you can stay within their brand, but sometimes they'll do things like that that enables you a simple thing, right? Ensure the primary value proposition. We're going to be testing value proposition, but are they even showing a value proposition? What are they showing? What is the value proposition? Is it the right thing, right? A subhead can make the difference in the value proposition, right? That's backing up the headline. Save time and double your sales with just one click. I just made that up. It's, there. It could be a subhead can do the value through a third-party endorsement. A subhead could do things, could lift conversions because it is showing proof that your claim made in the headline is believable, right? Believability. What, letting somebody else in? Believability, credibility, right, is all a factor. In fact, I have a little session that I'd love to do that will mix in with what we're doing on the power of believability, the power of credibility. And we have our clients most of the time and recommend that they do a believability, credibility asset audit, right? It's not just about testimonials. It's like a natural mix of what we talked about. But in the overall, we're answering just to there. Why am I here? What can I do here? Just breaking this out. Why should I do it with you? Are there trust elements? Is there a phone number? Are there testimonials above the fold? Trust symbols, reviews, differentiators are huge. I talked about this. Does your page look like the same page that everybody else is offering you niche? I'm telling you, it becomes blindness to that. When I've used this example, so forgive me, and I know, Jason and I know that Brian are in this niche, and I'm sure they're very familiar with it, and there's other people too. But one of the first things I noticed in the financial niche, and I've said this before, was just how damn similar everything is. All you do is click on one ad for a client and watch what starts taking place in your feed. And tell me you really can tell a difference. I mean, a difference at a glance, right? If we know we have 3 seconds and I am getting your page, but just saw 2 other pages a moment ago, why am I going to take action, right? Why? It has to, different is better than good. And I think that can be in both design, that can be in layout, that can be deciding whether you need an opt-in or not need an opt-in, that can decide what kind of front-end offer. This can be the type of offer you make and what the layout of that page looks like. And I don't want to reveal there anything. I won't keep this up. I know that like Jason did a phenomenal job of this with one of your clients because it is a low ticket front end, but it looks completely different than 99% of the other, if you really think about it, front end low tickets are being offered right now, at least in the financial niche, from my point of view, from my limited scenario. I'm not saying that the copy isn't brilliant, and it is, and the angles and everything else, but you just want to think about this. So when you're first thinking about things and giving you a framework, it all is going to be, we talk top down, front back, we talk plug the hole, but we're in a page and we have all of these visuals. Let's ask ourselves these questions, because everything is about asking questions. It's just like you have your little chart and you say, this is to provide social proof. What could you do better? Is it really providing social proof? See, many times they suck. Are those symbols that they'll get? You can make up your own trust symbols, right? To illustrate. You see this in the neutral space, but in every space, right? Giving the top 3 or 5, organic, vegan, whatever it may be, whatever, lose weight, etc. What those images say, if they say anything, what the images are, all are going to be testable. Are they really conveying? Should that be there, or should be 3 testimonials be there, right? We need to ask ourselves these questions for each of the variables. I mentioned this, the 3-second rule, and forgive me, but it's not anything I made up or is new, but it's real. And I don't know if it's 3 seconds or 7 seconds or 10 seconds, but watch the bounce rates of what's going on. It's a real thing. It's always been a real thing. I don't have studies to prove what I'm about to say, but I would argue that with people's attention spans, this is even more important. So if you understand people are glancing at your page, now we're still talking about messaging, right? These aren't about tricks, but we want to answer those questions really fast. And if we do that, right, we hear the word about consumption, but what about those that you have a greatest product and real good copy and the VSL is killer, but if they never hit play or they never go forward because they think you are more of the same or they're not clear on those answers, they are very, very rarely going to dig in further. I shouldn't say they won't. You're killing your conversions, right? I'll give an example on, since people talk on the media buying side, and I'll give a real example when we get there when we demo, and I've talked about this before, so forgive me. But in Visiopt, you can see the entire customer journey. And it's like Facebook and others have their own ad journeys. So they were getting between 4 to 5 clicks on ads, conversion ads, before they were making a sale. What does that mean? It means that the page wasn't working that well. It means that the prospect had to convince themselves to buy, and that's why they're hitting all of these scenarios. So there's other tools to see, but here's the thing, and there's something I'll talk about and ways you can handle that on the ad media buying side of things. But bringing this and illustrate, and that helped, and I'll bring it up when hopefully Brian will do that session. We'll add on and tack on to that, and we'll talk about this from an ad perspective. But it just goes to show you that even here, when you see this, it's actually a conversion issue, which is why we're handling this here. I don't know if somebody has a, well, please mute yourself. I'm hearing noise in the background. Sorry. I'm just going to see if I can, well, maybe they muted themselves. Okay, sorry about that background noise. I can't find it right now. So let's continue. So this is just a partial list because everybody likes lists. I don't believe in like checklists, but let's just look at this and answer this question, right? We're going to start at the top of fold. Variables located at the top of the page. We know that, right? The headline, the hero image, subheadlines that may or may not exist, pre-headlines. We have made huge differences in just a plain VSL page by testing pre-head, pre-head, headline, and subhead. Now, there's a lot more you can do. I don't want you to think there, but all of these things combined make a big difference into what's going to actually happen. The body copy, right? Are we questions? These are questions you can ask, right? We're talking about questions. We're going to focus on the feature benefit alignment, right? Does every feature we're bringing up on a page that we're talking about, everything has a feature, even if the feature is a webinar or what they're going to learn on a webinar, does it tie to a clear actionable benefit to the user? Now, we took this 10 steps further through semantic separation. We want to further ask us, are we dimensionalizing that properly? Because we don't want to just list features. We don't want to just list benefits. We want to make that visual and visceral in the prospect's eyes, right? Are they using any kind of storytelling to emotionally connect with users on how the product, whatever that may be, solves their specific problems? Now, this doesn't mean you need a horror story, right? Like, you know, the I'll pick up John Benson horror story in a VSL. It doesn't. A benefit can be turned into a mini story, right? A testimonial can be turned into a case study. Literally anything that's on a page, on an e-commerce page. We talked about Nathan's e-commerce page on the last call. Those can bring stories into the benefits. Are we addressing objections? Remember that one of the things that we did in our research was to identify all these. I mean, are we asking ourselves, have we answered them preemptively? Have we done that in the way? Sometimes it's just the copy. Sometimes it's FAQs. Sometimes it's guarantees, right? And I would argue, by the way, everything I'm talking about is at every step of the funnel, and I'll talk about this in more detail when we look at and break down, because I get the question all the time, what do I do with this page when there's not much on this page? So we'll talk about that, right? But we know this. We talked about Agora that came up with their program, I think there, where they'll just lay out all the objections. These are other things. So every one of the triggers that we talked about, but these are questions, right? Psychological triggers. We can ask ourselves these questions. Impact based upon priority, right? What is likely to have the highest influence on conversions? The headline, the overall offer, CTA. But these are questions you have to ask yourself. I can say to you, here's a checklist. But you know I have a problem with checklists because it's not always the most obvious. It could be the hidden, you know, they're hiding the lead and they just have a completely incorrect lead, and we're going to test that up there instead of down there. It could be a huge distraction, which I've seen. Like, again, it's all about me, right? So these are questions that you asked, right? Does this align with their journey, right? Have we answered all their buyer questions? Something that would take too long to dive into right now, but we have to be aware, God, this is going to sound bad, of what stage of awareness they are, aware of their awareness, right? We have to know. These are questions that we have to ask. We've laid this out in our research, I believe, so I don't want to misspeak, Brian. So you're going to talk about this, how you approach it from an ad perspective, which is really good, I believe, so clear. But the point is that we have to make sure, is it in alignment or not? And we can look at quick wins, right? What can we begin with that requires low effort but high impact? Pre-head, headline, sub-headline, the CTA, the hero image. You're going to see it in this, right? We can prioritize. I'm going to let this, just leave this through. We can prioritize variables that can offer applicable parts and variables to other parts of our funnel. This is part of what Nathan was talking about. And when I say other parts of the funnel, I mean there should be a feedback loop coming from the ad side to the conversion side, from the conversion side to the ad side, from what you're doing on your first page, feeding potentially what the messaging that's working on upsell one or other offers that throughout the thing. So you can prioritize. These are questions that you want there is, you know, which variable or variables or versions of variables are going to allow me to have the most scalability in that messaging, right? And this comes from what we've done before. Let me just show, we talk about this, right? Showing fewer variables, triggers, and trust. So I'm just going to look at this, our sample page, right? And I just numbered the various things that we're talking about. 1, 2, 3, right? 4, just we all have 5 is this. 6 is this secondary, I guess we'll call it call to action. 7 is the image. 8, I'll show you, is blank that I think is missing, and we'll call this 9, right? So I am not picking, and I don't know this person, and I am assuming that they're successful in running ads successfully, and I hope that they are. This is an experiment. But when I start asking myself, why am I here? In my mind, I say they fail. Founder of the 10-hour, 10 work month. I don't know what that means. And that's about them, right? Quite obvious. I don't see in my 3-second rule, why am I here? What can I do here? I think the answer is also, this is my perspective and my perspective only for anybody's clothing. This is how I would look at this page and use what we've just been talking about. And of course, I'm going very superficially, but how we can do this quickly. And I know this isn't everybody's type of page or style page, but it's a real page that people are showing for some sort of info product that are paying money on Facebook. So, you'll see a variety of different pages. I'm unsure what I can do there, right? Why should I do it with you? Again, I look at this and I have no understanding here. And they named it why I should do it. So when I start looking at how can we improve this? Well, I start saying, number 1, phone trust, right? We've talked about that. I happen to mention that before. Number 2, right? How can I answer? How can I improve on this? The pre-head, a call out. Let's answer why I'm here. It doesn't have to be, and anybody who saw the previous calls, attention business owners. That's like, the lowest hanging fruit there. It can be, calling out their pain or calling out the benefit. And we've talked about this, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time. Yeah, I mean, if you want to, I'm not saying you can't go attention so-and-so, but I think you can do so in a much more smoothly way. But a simple thing I would do here in that pre-head is I would start asking myself the question going back to the semantic variables that I created here and ask myself, how in a pre-head can I answer this as a call out intelligently? And with semantic separation, there's a lot of different ways I can do it. The headline, again, I'm saying I'm not picking on something that's working. We're talking about how can we make something that's working work better, right? It's about her, at least at a glance, founder of the 10-hour, 10K work month. I don't know, although I can make assumptions. I'm not 100% sure what that even means, right? I mean, and I would guess, this is a guess, a testable guess, that because the headline is about her and she's the founder and the instant subconscious reaction is going to be, who cares, that she could do better. That's what we're talking about, right? There's no subhead. Can we test backing up any claims? Can we be more specific as to, let's assume she wants to do a variety or a variation of that headline. Can we, first of all, again, I try a variety of different headlines and different styles and different emotions, but let's just go and look at the subhead, right? That doesn't really exist. It isn't there now, so we're going to have it there. We can test and back up any claims that are being made. We can be more specific. We can easily answer these questions. The lead is better than the rest, right? But what makes it different? What's the mechanism? What am I doing? So I'm not going to read out her whole lead, but again, she starts it with I'm not a fan of that, just me. Step-by-step framework will teach you how to create work-life balance that enables you to work 10 hours a month and generate over 6 figures. Okay, at least we see a benefit starting to form there. But I have no idea at this point what this actually is. I'm going to use this or what am I actually going to be doing? And I'm going to join the movement, but what movement am I actually joining? Why would I join a movement if I have no clue at this point what this actually is? And if I'm going to do that and I want to bring them further down, if I want to use something like this as a lead, I'm asking myself, yep, hierarchical design would say put a CTA there because there's always fast movers, but that also pays for specificity. I'll do another note. Sometimes, and I've seen this in particular, more sophisticated audiences, and those of us that come from a direct response background are really well aware of the curiosity and the power of curiosity and the power of sort of, we'll call it blind or semi-blind copy and ads. But depending on how you're targeting and depending on your audience, being direct sometimes will increase conversion substantially. Revealing the price sometimes can. People are now skeptical. We need to understand we're in a different world. I'm not saying that it's going to work for everything. I'm not saying there. But while I go through this, I start to think of that. For only X amount of dollars, you're going to accomplish X. No, I don't want to put the headline that, well, if you're putting a CTA here and asking me to join a movement, and I don't know what movement. So I'm just going through and asking, right? So the lead could be better. Again, I've already said this. What movement? The login. This is what I pointed out. And I understand why. This is also the homepage. Then don't send traffic to your homepage. This, huge distraction. If I'm talking to one audience, it's the power of one. I only want to talk to one audience. So if this site had very little traffic, one of the first things I may do is just remove that. Test it's there versus it's not there, right? Just showing through an example, right? This is in the middle of a sales page, and you'll see this all the time. You will see on sales pages that you are coming into in a variety of markets, not necessarily that, but where it is a complete distraction. And the only way you get to that, and don't just jump right into they need a different style sales page, and don't jump right into that, it's the offer. Many times it's these things that are killing and crushing conversion. I look at the image and I'm sure it's a very nice image of her. That's what I'm supposing, right? But again, I ask myself the question, if I don't know who she is, right? Who is it? Why should I care? What about your credentials? What about your trust symbols? What about your authority, right? If I am going to put something here and take up all this space, then I want something in a way, maybe if it was an image and maybe I put all kinds of trust symbols as to what she's accomplished, or maybe I'd have potentially, this is top ahead, a testimonial about from a satisfied student, right? Or students. There's a lot that you can do here. And so you can have an image, you can have a caption to an image, you can have, for number 8 was trust symbols, which is going to be down below. We talked about caption to the image, a headline about, again, is about her. So this is for this step, just following a simple framework. Why am I here? What can I do here? And why should I do it with you? And I just want to make, as we go on to the next step, to try to wrap this all up. It's not about being perfect. It's about having a framework or a structure. Yeah, Scott, we still have 100 headlines that we could put there. Oh, yeah, you're always going to have that. Some of it is asking yourself the question as marketers, making an assumption or assumptions and starting with something, right? By answering, what are we actually trying to accomplish? And are we doing that or not doing that? So let's continue. I'm going to mention about testing strategy real quick. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I want to make sure we have plenty of time. I may have talked about this previously, but I'm going to talk about it again. And to put this in perspective, Visiopt has inside of it traditional split testing. You can do A/B testing. It's the most least used tool in our tool belt, as we like to say. So when I say these things, it's not because I don't have a tool that does that. It's just there's also a better way. Oops, hold on. Right, somebody's raising their hand. Okay. So let me just make mention of this, and then I'll answer your question, or Vera, that'd be great. Traditional split testing is done 2 ways, and I just want to make this clear, and we'll talk about this most likely again. Traditional testing, if done properly, is isolating one variable, headline A versus headline B. Okay, we talked about the problems with that. I probably will bring it up again. If you're doing headline A versus headline B, and you end up seeing a increasing conversion of, let's say, even 5-7%, you're going to be in that test for an awful long time. That's one of the problems with traditional split testing. And it's why people don't get to proper statistical significance, or they get tired with their testing and they either launch it too fast and they're doing the incorrect, making an incorrect decision, and then things start to flip. And so they start putting this out to real traffic, and the win that they thought they had didn't win. The second way is cluster testing. And I saw this on the call yesterday. I see it all the time. It's not just something that 1 or 2 people make. It's 7 to 10 figure companies are all doing it. If you are making changes to more than one variable on a page, you're doing cluster testing. And then comes in, back, the same problem that we've talked about, which if you see a lift and you go live, which of those variables out of that realm that you made are increasing conversions and which are decreasing conversions? And people ask, and I'll talk about this. I'll talk about this real quick. In Visiopt, we have what we call smart relational testing. It's been around, uses machine learning and AI, has backed up to engineering, and it's proven. But the bottom line is we're able to test, instead of headline A versus headline B, we're able to test headline A, B, C, and D with hero image 1, 2, 3, and 4. At the same time, we're able to test call to action 1, 2, 3, and 4. Right? We're able to test all of those. We're able to determine which is the perfect page recipe without requiring any additional traffic that you would use in the test. So if I took just 3 headline variations, right? Test. This actually should say 3 images and 3 calls to action at the same time. Forgive me, actually 2 of each, a smaller test. And we would analyze the relationship. We could narrow that down to 10 pages, 10 page recipes automatically in Visiopt. That would take you 64 different pages to get to that same data. In some of our tests, it is the equivalent of more than 4,317, it's a very specific number, test pages that we can do down into 18. And so who's going to win? We're going to win, right? It's about getting data quicker. We'll talk about that as we go through. But we're able to discover, and the reason I brought you through, not only the winning variable of variables, the page recipe, and we have something called variable influence. And so we are able to determine and get a report and say, out of all these versions, variables and versions, these are the ones, the variable and version that had the most impact actually on the sale. I just want that to be on everybody's radar. You can do everything that we're talking about without Visiopt. None of this has been a commercial for Visiopt. With whatever tool you have, that's what we're training you for, right? I'll let you know that I happen to be good friends with some of the couple of the largest page builder software that's out there. They don't use their own A/B testing, but we'll answer the questions that were placed in the group about this, how to get in and out of tests quickly, how to do a lot of the stuff that was posted there. But for now, in step 3, you're defining your testing strategy. And so what do I mean by that? I mean, you have to go based upon the resources you have. So if you do not have or aren't choosing to use Visio, then chances are you'd be smarter picking one of those variables at a time. It's all about Kaizen, continual improvement. But I'm just letting that know. So we've come up with the variables we want to test. How we test them, where we test them, depends upon which tool you're using. It's just, sorry, it's a matter of fact. But if you're doing even simple, basic A/B testing, you're going to be a million light years ahead because you have a better instinct, or not instinct, framework, strategy to determine which of those variables I'm going to pick first and which I'm going to be able to do to get the biggest impact, right? I can do headline A versus headline B versus headline C. We'll talk about this a little bit more. Here is a question that comes up that Nathan, I believe this will tie into your question. Kelvin, yours, and there were others that have asked this. I'll just take a drink. It's about alignment, right? That's really what you're asking, at least the way I take it. Oh, I apologize. Let me stop there. Somebody raised their hand. If you have a question before I go on to anything, I apologize. I get in a roll and I forget. Go right ahead and you can speak up. I'll pause here for a second.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to quickly ask, what do you think about the PXL framework by CXL? Because for a person like me who is an ADHD, if I see all these questions, I get lost in the weeds, right? So for me, I just like to have a checklist for sure, like for every single thing. And I'm getting confused because you one time say that you don't need a checklist, but then you give a checklist, but then I'm like, where do we fall on that aspect of the spectrum? I get the point that you are preaching more on the, like, how do you question the whole thing on the website and find out which variable we need to test out. But like in terms of getting a priority which needs to be testing out, I really like to follow a framework where I can put them all and then rank them. Like there was like ICE framework, impact, all that. So why not just have that kind of thing? Like, wouldn't it just make more sense to have some kind of a framework to follow on that? Because for a person like me, I can question all day long, but I'm just like not following.
Well, here's the problem. And I talked about this in a previous class, so I'll keep. It's a really good question. I'm going to answer it fully, and thank you for that. I talked about this at pretty much at length early on, right? A checklist. Most of the checklists, I'm going to answer you just straightforward and simple. Most of the checklists are completely useless. Every page is different. Every item that is going on with a page, funnel, or item is different. And so what we're giving you here is frameworks and strategies, not checklists. I have all those checklists. We would never use them. We just don't. They're not part of what we've done and what we've done for years. To answer your question specifically, I haven't given you checklists. What I've given you is some items or basis for analyzing your page, right? We gave a framework that says, A, list all the possible variables on a page, right? B, identify what their purpose is, what their role is in a page. And when we do that, then we're going to apply semantic separation to it. And then today, and I'm simplifying this, and when we did that, we said, okay, what should be on a page and what shouldn't be on a page. Many of the marketers here on the call or copywriters will have their own instinct, eye, and goal, because just about everybody here has either copywriting or ad media buying experience. But if you want a starting point, we're not giving you a checklist of what to test. We're giving you a checklist earlier of what to look for. What are the major pieces of a page so that you can look and say, did they cover them? Are some of them missing? Is there something missing on the page that belongs on the page? Is there something that's on the page that doesn't belong on the page? And then as far as your framework, we're talking top down, front back, and we talked about the reason for impact. So again, you are open to follow whatever checklist you want to. That is not the way we do it. It's not the way we teach it. And it's why, and I don't mean this to sound at all, so please forgive me, hyperbolic or arrogant, but it's why we've never had a client, and I've talked about this previously, that hasn't hired 2, 3, 4 different CROs or have in-house where we haven't been able to out of the gate beat the performance or conversions in our testing. So I'd rather give you, the simple answer is I'd rather give you the strategies to go out. And I know this is very, very cliche, probably a better metaphor, but I'd rather give you the tools and strategies to fish for a lifetime than a checklist to fish today and maybe get a small bump. That's really
my apologies. I got my question wrong because I was more on referring how to prioritize, which we are looking right now on the alignment side. So
okay.
whenever I'm like doing something of that nature, I would rather go through a methodological framework like something like ICE or PXL framework where I can rank the variables and then I can actually come to the conclusion, okay, these are the ones which I'll be testing on.
Yeah. Well, I think, and just again, I think that's what we just tried to do, right? You know, why, I mean, with this, if you really need the simplest of frameworks to follow, and you can go deeper than this, why am I here? What can I do here? Why should I do it with you? Evaluate the variables that are there. You saw me in this scenario, number them. And now pulling from what we did previously, you have your priority list, right? Top down, front back. I don't know if that fully answers your question, but when it comes to priority, we're also giving you frameworks that you can follow. So that's very simplest for everybody here. If you want to know what to test tomorrow, pick the top of fold, identify the top, if you need a simple checklist, a top 5 or 6 variables like I did previously here on the page I brought up, and apply those to your semantic separation. There is your top, in this case, identify 9 items that you can go and you can test. And I hope I'm not trying at all to evade or not answer your question directly, but that's my reason why. That's why we do it. And the reason I don't give a simple checklist is, first of all, you know, pages are designed differently. The purpose of pages are sometimes different depending upon, like we talked about, where that is in the customer journey, what their level of sophistication is, what they're doing on a page. As an example, if I give you a simple checklist and you don't follow your own evaluation, then you're not going to be able to see or identify something that is a huge block. And let's just say, for example, is this CTA in the middle of the page? Like, I don't even know how to put that on a checklist, right? Is that affecting? Is the big block about us, and I'm not saying it's on this page, but that we've seen, just taking away from and not increasing conversions? So it is a way to think. But to your specific question, I would say this, and I hope this helps. I don't think you have to overcomplicate it, because now you have at your disposal, when you get to this point, a lot of high quality, high value variables that are going to move the needle for your client. So for you, that I don't want to misword what you said to me, so forgive me, but I'll put it in my own words, that you don't want to get lost in the questions. I would say first that optimization in analyzing a page properly is all about asking yourself the questions, not somebody else's simple framework. It is all about asking those right questions. But if I had to say, and you want to just keep it simple and keep yourself on track, I would solve the following. I'm just going to repeat: top down, front back, top of fold variables. Ask the questions in that top of fold. Why am I here? What can I do here? Why should I do it for you? You'll identify all those variables. In my example here, I identified 9 of them, and I've gone through and given you quick examples of what and how we could test just upon, that was me taking 2 minutes, right? And I'm pretty sure, and you could say it's from experience, and just like anything else, the more you do this, the more experience you'll get. But if we go back to, let's see if I can find it without me driving everybody nuts. But if we can go back to this page here, this is without doing the research. This is without analyzing the semantic separation. We've identified all the variables on top of fold. We've asked ourselves all of these questions. We have 9 steps that we could test right from the beginning. And if we had our research and our semantic separations for each one of these, we would have multiple variables that we would test. And I would make the argument, based upon experience, that you will see wins, and probably one win after another, just applying that level of it. So I really hope that helped a little bit.
Can I ask you a question about above the fold here? So let's say you identified 6, 9 variables or so above the fold. Are you doing it like this? Are you saying, okay, I'm testing variable one time until I find that winner, then I'm moving to variable 2, and I'm testing that one until I find that winner, then I'm moving to variable 3 and testing that until I find that winner? Or are you spending multiple tests on each variable across?
That's a really good question. So I'm going to cheat with my answer, but it's the truth. We do a Visio smart relational test depending upon the level of traffic that a client has. We will start with what we call one of our L4s, which is a smart relational test. We will pick 3 of the top of fold variables to start with. We will test 3 to 4 of each of those versions in that single test. You don't have to know anything about design of experiment to be able to accomplish and do that. You can, again, it's literally, I'll show in another class, was there, point and click, because you're asking how we do it. I'm going to answer you though, if you don't, because there's another part to that question, what if you're not using Visio? But I'm going to just tell you, we're going to get a ton of data in a single test, right? So we're going to know, we're going to almost always, not always, can't promise it, but we're going to see a winner. We're going to see certain variations of those rise to the top. In a situation like this, where I have, and we identified, let's say 9 top of fold variables, we will run sometimes those exact same variables again, depending on the research that we did, because I want to learn more, and I'm going to be able to see the impact of these variables. Clearly, they're going to have variables, and maybe they're going to have impact. And then we may move around in future tests again with assuming a low level of traffic. We could do some with 7, 8, and 9 variables. There are certain clients I could take, and I can test all 9 of these variables in one test. and do the equivalent of thousands of tests. That's just what we're able to do. And I welcome anybody, and there'll be an opportunity. Again, this class is not a commercial for Physiopt, although I'm just being honest and passionate. I believe everybody should be using it for their clients, and it's going to get them a huge leg up. That's how we do it. The second part of your question, or implied there, is let's say we don't. Let's say we don't have or aren't using those benefits. What do? We have no other choice than to pick the variables from top of fold. And so your question was specifically, and this is where the art and science comes in, and some instinct. So we have a framework, right? We know we have a framework. We've answered those questions. And if you're doing one at a time and they have enough traffic, I would isolate, let's say, the headline and do an A, B, C, D, let's say four headlines at once. Is this ideal? Can we do better when we can see how all of it? Yes, but we're asking, what do you do if you have there? And I'd say there, or I'd answer the second question. I'd say, listen, let's just test pre-heads. The control on the next thing, the control has, and this is if we're isolated, right? If we don't have, the control has nothing there. There's no pre-head. Let's test no pre-head plus 3. And every time I'm getting data from those tests, and I'm not even talking while we're talking about real data, right? We're talking about that, but we're also learning which appeals to Nathan's point, like what he said, sort of, I'll use what he said there. Which forest, if I want to go back to one of my old analogies, you're starting to get in, you're starting to learn things. Wow, they're responding to the away headline much more, or the fear headline much more than the enjoy headline. And then maybe what I do is within and I'm making this up, this is the enjoy headline, and maybe I say, you know what, but I have 3 different enjoy appeals, and let's just see where we're at. You have to work with whatever tools you will work with. And I'll bring this back to the classics, right? To the David Ogilvy's, and before them, the Claude Hopkins, and they would test, like we talked about previously, headline 1 with this mailing piece and headline 2 with this mailing piece, and had to wait for the results to come in. So even if your tools are limited, and I don't want it to sound, nobody's tools here on this call should be limited. Again, we'll talk about this. You can do better. But if you just want to use the builder that somebody is using on their page because they are using Go High Level or ClickFunnels or whatever, understanding that, again, this and there, most of those owners do not use those tools to test their own stuff, and that's, it just is what it is. But if you're asking how can somebody do that, that's how I do it. And I clearly know that above the fold is just going to have more impact. We just know that. We don't have the ability, right? We have to pick our battles. And so that's also why I just want to add, this isn't a checklist, and I'm not picking on that because it was an excellent question. I love that he asked the question, but I will see something on a page, and so will you, with your own unique eyes, following through this and say, that just doesn't belong there.
Yeah.
And so we may just say, you know what, I have all this stuff that I want to test above the fold, but I want to run a test and see if I get rid of this. And by the way, I know I keep picking on the same thing, but I've seen like these huge things, right? Huge sections that are like about us, where it takes that, what I call power of one, you may call it something else, but power of one converts. You don't want to ask somebody to make too many different decisions at once. And when I see that, I may go directly to that. So the way we work and the way we've trained and the way we see the thing is a combination. If you have that kind of framework, you can choose to jump around, and you may see some obvious things. And I hope, because there's no one answer to that, right? There just isn't. But if I had a default, so it tied my hands, where would I do? I'd start at the top down, and I'd start in most pages, even e-commerce, with, headline, pre-head, subhead. They may look different at different style pages. Start there, CTA, hero image and/or video, and we'll talk about that. And that's where, assuming I don't see anything completely obvious in our other thing, that's probably where I'd start. And depending on where I'm going, I would test different, we'll call it appeals, because there's so much that we can test. Here's what I wouldn't do, just me. You probably could stay and keep testing headlines. You could play beat the control headlines to the end of time. I probably would look for 1 or 2 bumps, find out where that forest is, that that appeal is, that trigger is, that emotion, and then I would start testing the variables around it. I brought something up. Was that helpful, by the way? Did that answer the question?
Oh yeah, yeah. And I understand now, I think, where you're coming from here. Because you'll land on a page, look above the fold, label, let's say 6 or 7 variables, maybe 9 variables, and then look at that and also label what could be missing from this page too, variables that could be missing, and say, look, I'm looking at these, these variables I've labeled, and 2 or 3 are clearly weaker than they could be, right? I mean, they could be stronger. And I can kind of see where your strategy goes from there. And I agree with you on your approach, just a very strategic approach with frameworks at the same time, but it allows the flexibility for you to use what you know. And I understand now, like, why you're spending so much time talking about why you need to understand what you understand, because that's what you're using to make these decisions.
Yep.
Like everything you're talking about. And it's not like the brainless sort of like step 1, step 2, and all this. It's like understanding the complete strategy and why you're doing what you're doing.
So I'll talk of that and just bring up something I talked about before, right? First of all, as you're talking, You and I approaching the exact same page separately will definitely come up with different tests, and that's good, right? You're going to get out because it isn't right. And so that's actually good. You're leaning into your experience along with a framework. You're hopefully leaning into the research plus your experience. And I would say, even if we take the research, which everybody here should follow that, go back to that, start with that. Two people are going to interpret that research, even though it's very clear, two different ways, right? Meaning in similar ways, we'll hit around the bullseye. So that's number one. And I think that's really important. And so I don't care how much experience anybody on this call has with CRO, or technically the word CRO or testing. Everybody here that's run ads, everybody here that's worked with a client, everybody here that's written copy has an understanding. In fact, and I know copywriters won't like this, I like to think like, you can beat the copywriter, because if you're doing this through strategic testing, you can figure out which appeals work. And ultimately, at the end, it's all about clarity. So that's part one. I hope that makes sense. The other thing you brought up, or we brought up during this, that I brought up the power of one. So I'll stop, even though, and I hope people can go a little bit longer, just so I can get through. But I want to say something about that. One of the things that you should always evaluate, and you can add to your little bag of tricks, is when you read, if that's what you want to call it, I would call it tricks. Read a page from beginning to end. It's part of what we do in the research. And when I say things don't belong, it should be a slippery slope power of one. And what you'll start to see, even when there's been some experienced copywriters, is they start talking about multiple things at once. And we know confused mind doesn't buy. And so we actually, if we were looking at a long form sales page, one of the things I learned from a mentor years and years ago was we would break it down line by line by line. And you can do the same thing in copy, because remember, it all has to make sense. The other side of that is, does it make sense when you scan it? So I'll just throw that out. That I would call the sales argument, and that applies on a simple VSL page, that applies on a long form page, it applies on an e-commerce page. They'll start talking about this benefit or this overarching, and you can spread out like you can in a sales letter, but they all have to feel congruent, and it's like one. So I hope that made sense. Let me go over, so I can, real quick. And if we have to, we can bring this over quickly to the next class, but I'd like to go through. So how do we get these in alignment? I'm just going to give this quickly, right? Again, we're understanding how to do this. You're going to select your variables without worry. So step one, I start just picking my variables in the same way that I spoke to you about, right? We're picking what do we want to test and what are we going to start with. You can ask yourself, do all the selected variables that we created align with the overall page? They do not have to be 100% congruent. They have to align. Are there any conflicting signals between the variables being tested? I will let you know. This is just questions, and you'll be able to come back to this, right? Select without worry. Don't even think about it. Ask these questions. Do the selected variables align? Are there any conflicting signals between the variables being tested? Now think about this for a minute. You're designing tests many times with just headline 1 versus headline 2 versus headline 3. We apply this to 3 variables and 4 versions or more of this, and they all align. It is not as difficult, and I'll show you as an example, as it may sound in your mind, right? Is the tone of the headline match the tone of the images in the CTA? These are questions you can ask. I'm going to tell you that for the most part, we don't worry about exact congruencies. We see increases in conversions by having a one tone in the headline and a different in the image sometimes. It's okay. We can go through, right? We just don't want complete mismatches. When you are using semantic separation, that I'm not going to take so long to go over, we spent time here, that you can test variables that are very different, but still in alignment with your overall goals, right? We can test headlines with images that evoke complementary emotions. I can test 2 different headlines, 2 different emotions, 3 different emotions. The example I gave you with 10 different emotions that all apply to our ideal customer, right? It came out. They will all be in general alignment. So what you are in essence looking for, right? Like I say here, don't be afraid of minor mismatches or incongruences. So this is much easier than you really think it is. Decide what you want to test. And when you're outlining them and say, I'm going to test 3 of the headline, 3 of the CTA, and 3 of the just picking on a hero image, unless there's a complete and utter complete mismatch, don't worry what go through. And that's where you're going to start to see breakthroughs, right? So let me give you a quick example. And I hope this is just really, really simple, just pulled out of the ear real quick. So let's just say these are the control variables. Take control of your freelance life with our all-in-one AI tool, right? Hero image, a clean workspace with a laptop and a to-do list, app open. The CTA, start your free trial today. Headlines to test. We could test all these headlines. Save time, earn more, the ultimate tool for freelancers. Emotional, say goodbye to overwhelm and hello to productivity. Authority, And this isn't for analysis of copy. They're just quick examples. Trusted by 50,000 freelancers to maximize success. All of these are congruent. All of these are very, very different. The images, a smiling freelancer working in a cozy cafe, right? Product focused, a close-up of the app and interface showing its dashboard. Abstract image, a clean, minimalistic design with a focus on the tool. We talked about a man using the tool, a woman using the tool, right? Somebody frustrated. They're all going to be, in this simple example, congruent. You are not taking people away from their goal. Your goal is to figure out which of these appeals is working, right? The image, right? We talked about the control, a smiling freelancer. Oh, we did that, forgive me. CTAs, get started now, offer end soon. Urgency, value, unlock productivity, try it free. Ease of use, see how it works, start free today. When you're using semantic separation, I think people put too much emphasis or worry in the fact that it may be slightly incongruent. You need to use your judgment, right? But when I would usually lean into, unless it's completely throwing off a page, I would lean into allowing some of those incongruences. As I mentioned before, everybody thinks that if the ad is about X, now presumably all your ads are appealing to the same market, right? They're going to the same page. If not, that's a whole different issue and problem. But the test is the same traffic during the same time period going to the same page. That's a test. And so if you have your Facebook ads, you don't have to worry about its exact congruency with each and every ad. You're taking that traffic and all those different appeals, and your goal of your page should be to appeal to and capture the largest swatch of that audience. So even, and I believe the question was asked, I just want to keep going on this, right, is that it does not have to match one-on-one exactly. It's about being proper for the proper page. And the example I gave before earlier, so forgive me if I'm repeating, but I'm talking because the conversation was just yesterday, that they're only going so far if they're trying to match it direct to the ads, right? Their old strategy, and they have a number of clients, was all like, we're going to find that appeal in the ads and we're going to apply it directly to the page. And then we're going to apply, and this is a whole different, scroll tracking, which we'll talk about in the next class, observational versus optimizational. And that's how we're making our decisions. It's only getting them sometimes nowhere for each parts. So really quickly.
Scott, can I jump in real quick just while you're on the point?
Yep.
David likes to talk about your sales copy should be like a greased slide, and there shouldn't be any rough patches or anything that throws them off of the slide, which is kind of what my question was asking about earlier. But I've often found that having some curvature to the slide, going to the left, going to the right, maybe a hill and then a drop, gives like an emotional roller coaster appeal to your copy. So it doesn't always have to be like a straight 45-degree angle slide from top to bottom. So that's where the incongruency can come in and actually lead to the appeal of a sales page. But if you have a part where it just throws them off of the slide, or they hit a spot where it just comes to a grind like sandpaper, that's what you want to avoid.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. Yeah, that's true. That's why we're looking at our variables and we're asking ourselves the obvious question, right? Is there anything where we're throwing them off the slide? And I think my point is twofold, and what you're matching. Number one, yes, minor incongruencies are 100% okay, because there's so much semantically separate, different variations of every variable that are truly different, that are truly going to get a different emotional responses that still keep that slippery slide flow. Secondly, the way it's handled in different types of formats is different, right? So that would be 100% true in a long form sales letter, an e-commerce page, the way the best are converting, and even when they're a hybrid page with video and this could be both info and I use e-commerce style, it's done in a hierarchical form where the page is more or less segmented, meaning into pieces. So they all have to be congruent, but it makes it a little bit easier. Very, very good point. And I think we'll also hit another point here. So we talked about that just there. So we talked about Claude Hopkins, right? The idea here is that the overarching here is that we're testing diverse variables so that we can uncover high-performing variables, high-performing elements. If we go under the assumption on utilizing and sticking with your slippery slide, then we are limiting ourselves to never test the pieces of the page, the recipe, or the pie, and we're making assumptions. And then the only way truly to be able to test that in that theory would be to be able to completely rewrite everything every time you want to test. And I know I'm simplifying this, but going back to Claude Hopkins and doing, headline A versus headline B. So we talked about, right, learning over flow. That's an item. I don't want to take too long here because we talked about it. Breakthroughs by being diverse, by creating those, right? This is the point I wanted to get to. the top of fold, because we are making, I'm going to make another comment on that actually that may there. We're making the assumption, even in a long form, and David's right on the money, like that's absolutely best practices, not at all going, meaning from when you're writing a copy or sales letter at all against anything he's talking about. We're talking about like, how do we test and how do we flow from there? And we're making an assumption that the way about how people are reading your sales copy online in particular today. And so if you watch heat maps and recordings and scroll maps, which are available in Visio, and you want to see what people do, almost nobody, I should say that, but very few consume your sales copy in the way a copywriter that has spent a tremendous amount of time thinking about each and every word thinks that they do, right? They read the headline or the lead. They many times, I forget who said this, it may have been Dan Kennedy, it could have been someone else, it doesn't really matter. They'll go down to the bottom and see how much it costs, scroll their way up, and everything else is unselling them. So I think another important point when we're testing here is that, yes, I agree with what David said. I also agree that minor incongruencies and incongruencies will not cause issues. I further believe that your top of fold, because of the way people lead, will give you learnings, or even above that thing, where it will then you'll still get a jump in conversions, even with what you consider a bump. And then to your point before, maybe your next test after getting a big jump is trying to smooth out those perceived bumps to get your next jump in conversions, right? And so, this is what I'm basically saying here, and was to your initial, I think, point. Once you get your winning variables are identified, you can begin to test aligning other pieces of the copy, right? And so a couple of real quick things in addition, group tests by variable or theme, you can do that, right, if you really want. So in other words, we can say that we want to test. I do things in a different way. I'm going to let you know. When we're doing our smart relational tests, we're testing multiple appeals and multiple combinations. But if you are doing this, you can do so in a way, going back to the simple way, you can do headline A versus headline B versus headline C. And if emotion regarding, I don't know, maybe fear was the one that outpulled, you can then test, in your next test, images that, different variations of the fear, if that's how you want to go about it. It's a way to do it. We don't worry about that. We segment testing areas. So, and the last point I just want to make a point here is that when you're using semantic separation in large part, you're still able to test very, very differently without getting into too many congruent problems. So I'm going to fly through this because I want to share a bot. I'm going to just fly through this. We can come back on this, right? Core concept, ad copy and on-page testing coexists, right? We talked about this. A test is comparing the control and variations under identical conditions. It's the same grouping of ads at the same time, right? A test validity relies on isolating on-page variables, not offline. Online. Right now, I know in the clients we're working with, and a question that I asked Jason as well, if throwing too many ads at the page, right? I don't worry about segmenting which ads. You can do that. You can see that in Visio. We can see how different campaigns are performing in this test. We can do all of that. But we don't need to go into the weeds here. In general, you don't have to worry about direct congruency. If your ad is about blue widgets, then make sure your page isn't about red widgets. That's not semantic separation. That's just complete disconnect, right? And so we can take learnings. I'm just going to hit these there and we'll come back to this, that are on page, and we can feed them into our ad ecosystem, and we can take things that are working in our ad, not to copy directly, and we can feed them into our on page. So there should be a constant feedback loop. And I promise that I want to show two quick things, and I want to give everybody something here so that I can want to reshare. So give me 1 sec while I pull this over and make sure I'm on the right page. And so while I am, forgive me, trying to figure out where my thing is. Here we go. Sorry about that. So I'll make one more note about what we've been talking about. It is an art and a science. You need a framework and you need a strategy. If not, you're just the guy that is picking at, like I got on a call, I talked this before, and the agency starts saying, yep, they need stars here. You're going to put your testimonial here. You need the headline. This should be the headline, and you're making assumptions, right? It's just the slow boat if you're doing what everybody else is doing, right? Our job, I believe, when we're talking as full stack marketers, when we're talking as conversion rate optimization experts, which I believe all of us have to be. I don't care if you're the media buyer nowadays, because your biggest stumbling block is not having control over that page. If you just want your agency to be able to hang on to clients longer, work with them for a long time, not have that churn, it's important. If you're a copywriter that wants to enhance your work, or you want to become a full stack marketer, it all comes down to what's taking place on page. So with that little speech, that's why we do what we do. And I just want to also let you know, everybody, I know, either personally or know about or have learned about. Everybody that's in this class has the ability to do this. And you don't have to worry about making a mistake, because if you follow the framework, I am sure you can see lifts, and you'll start to see this everywhere. We'll talk about this. You'll start to see this in ads and how they can improve ads by breaking it down into its pieces. You'll start to see in these pages what seems to be missing. And it just starts to break down into its pieces when we understand that it's not just about our lead, that it could be everything else that is going on and getting into that, or it's not just about our opt-in page or just one headline. And many times people are thinking, incorrectly many times, that the offer's just no good. Well, that may be true, but then again, it very well may not. So with that said, here is a bot that I put together a while ago. We'll continue to improve it. It's the testing bot. Let me just again pick on this page. Sorry. That's all right, which is okay. My eyes are going now. I want to show you what this does. Hopefully I spelled that right. And I didn't, because I'm an idiot. I'm driving myself nuts here. So what we are learning is that I can't type when I have to. And my eyes, contacts are going. All right. All right, let me show you what it's going to bring and what you can do. Like all bots, and forgive you for my horrible spelling of your display and trying to get the URL. When you can get your URL correctly, or you want to add an image of the page, or you want to add the URL plus research, it will go through and do an analysis of your page. And I want to demonstrate this real quick because I think you're going to love it. Step one, I'm going to do quickly because I have like 10 minutes here. In-depth page analysis. It's analyzing the hero section. It's identifying the problems. It's giving some initial testing recommendations. It's analyzing the social proof section, and it's telling you some issues and giving you some recommendations. So sometimes it will talk about the flow. It will depend upon the page. It is giving us, and we're going to say continue. It is giving us the features benefit testing matrix. Now, you got a previous bot from Jason, which was awesome. This is a slight twist on that. Both are useful, but it's giving you the feature, the benefit of the benefit, and multiple testing variations that you can use. So where it is on the page. So I could have told it to expand upon or give more features, but at any rate, it is giving semantic separation testing benefits without us doing anything. It is analyzing, in this case, the hero section and the CTA test, and it's recommending urgency-based versus value-based. It's talking about the three-step process that happens to be, it's pulling from the page, and it's talking about different value propositions, right? Scientific results. It is step 4, it is prioritizing tests, price presentation, guarantee, social enhancements, benefit visualization, mobile optimization, critical missing elements. If you wanted, now, I want everybody here to understand what's going on behind here. That's why we did what we did. But I would say you could come out and use this bot. If you understand and did your research, will show you and give you more tests that you need to do or want to display for a client than you'd ever know where to go through. In other words, you don't have to worry about where your test is. A testing matrix, right? Goes through above the fold, pain points, scientific focus, social proof, which is price optimization, product benefit visualization. I'm not going to go through mobile experience, a 7-step strategic plan, right? We can continue. We can also, so I'm going to just we can go through that. So we can go through, you can have more than you want. You can also go through and you could, okay, I'm going to let this go. You can take the headlines and you can cut and paste everything from above the fold and say to this bot, take a look at above the fold and apply semantic separation to make testing recommendations. It will do the same thing it's doing to its report to anything you want. You could do it just for headlines. Give me 10 semantically separate headlines for this. Here's the control headline. Give me 10 more. Here's an image of the top of fold. Give me 10 very different, because it understands semantic separation, different hero images that you want to test. So if you combine this with your research, you have a virtual unlimited number of tests that you can use. So we can do more demo. And what I'll do is I'll apply some of this in the next class, we're going to do some site reviews and stuff, but I just wanted everybody to know about that. You'll all get access to that. I hope that you use it and that you love it. And just really quick, just say a couple of things. That's what's going to be upcoming. We're going to talk. We haven't forgotten about discussions about how to get clients. We're going to talk about media buying, which will include a discussion with Brian about ad copy. We're going to talk about how to apply what you've already been learning and are learning to ads. We'll talk about the customer journey and how to use it to your advantage, right? Both on the ad side and in the optimization side. We're going to do a VisiOp demo, and I know Jason has a really great surprise, and he'll be doing some teaching, and you just don't want to miss it. So I hope that was helpful. Brian, Jason, do you have anything else that you want to add, or maybe I left out, or?
No, it was awesome. It was awesome. Like I can just see myself using all of this for the rest of my career, to be honest, something that's just going to last the test of time. And it doesn't matter what changes in the market. You're going to be able to test variables. That's one thing I like about it. And your methodology for creating for coming up with all the variables. And I love your bot as well. That's a great bot. Yeah. So I know we have a lot of good bots coming up too, because you're gonna get a total of 10 of them. And what I like also is, as we talked about in our Slack channel, is like you're saying, everything you've taught up to this point is going to be applicable to ads. So it's almost like people don't even realize they're getting most of the media buying lessons right now as we're doing all this, because we're talking about testing variables in ads and whatnot, so
Yeah.
I'm excited about the rest of it. So
Yeah, that's cool. I appreciate it. I appreciate everybody on the call. I hope you got your questions answered, and I hope this starts to pull this together again. I know in the moment it can feel overwhelming. I will just leave again with one repeat. It doesn't have to be. You have the ability, if you go through this process and you pick based upon your gut, based upon the frameworks we got plus your gut, you are going to be 100 times ahead in testing methodology, in testing variables that are going to make a difference, in helping your clients run ads that are going to be profitable and scalable, than anything else. So you don't need to worry about getting perfect. And that's why I said it is a combination between both an art and a science. A lot of it's science and a framework you can follow, but once you get there, you can let your imagination go a little bit, and you almost can't make a wrong decision. So,
Can I throw in a quick
Insanely
question?
good.
I'm sorry, somebody, I didn't hear. Go ahead.
Sorry, Scott, I just wanted to say insanely good. Thank you.
Oh, thanks for that. I appreciate it.
Okay, Kelvin.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, no, it's mind blowing, absolutely mind blowing. Thinking of the applications, and maybe this answers from last week, because last week we showed identifying all the variables on a page that were possibilities that would need some testing, and you had a manual list that you had created, a spreadsheet, and I had asked, and you said, "Oh, you have a bot that can run through a page and identify and spit out all the variables." Is the bot you showed now, does that basically take care of that issue?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, and I'll just put a quick, I guess, caveat disclaimer. It clearly isn't everything, but yes. I mean, that bot is spitting out more than most people could test in the next year, depending on their traffic. So if you apply this bot, and I'm also, by the way, going to say the other bots as well. Like, I mean, if you go back to even the last pain point benefit finder, there's just so much that can be tested right there if you combine this with the research. So I just don't want to discount all of them combined. I believe work to do exactly what you want to do. But to your specific example, my answer would be yes, except it's not every possibility, but it's giving you a complete analysis of that page, which, by the way, you can run on different days and different times, because we're all at the mercy of, how Claude is feeling. But here's how I use it. And I don't know if Brian's still with us. I know he's used it but basically I'll let it analyze an entire page. I will read through all of the recommendations, and then I will ask it questions based upon the other work that I've done. So I will then again, be more specific. So maybe what I'll do, for example, just one example before I have to wrap this up, is I will say, okay, here's the top of fold, and feed it an image. Like, after getting all that, here are 10 psychological triggers that we found during our research. Can you produce for me, using semantic separation, 5 versions semantically different for each of these psychological triggers? So you can dig with this bot, and without having to do a whole lot of thinking, it can print out all the outputs. Now, like everything, I like to say, I really believe like the bots are huge, huge, huge time savers. I will also make the argument that you could probably just use the bots and be much, much further ahead than I would say anybody that I've seen. I think that you really, to get the magic, is going through the steps, going through the framework, and utilizing your own, strategic thinking and experience in combination with that bot, and you'll have magic. That's the way I look at it.
Awesome. And of course, I could feed my Facebook ads to the bot and ask for input and
Yep.
ideas on
Yep.
what to do.
The only tweak that I will tell people is that when I ask it, because it has semantic separation, the definition of it, and understands it, is that I'll typically use that in a prompt when I'm asking. I'll remind it to give me X amount of semantically separate. So yeah, you can do the same thing with ads.
So the bot is basically Scott's brain in a bot. Scott's brain
That's
in a bot.
not quite there yet, but that's what we're trying to do. I don't even know how to react to that one. I know there, but I'll call it more of a, I get what you're saying, and I love it, but I'd say it's just more of a tool that once you understand will take a lot of that legwork out. I mean, I think, you know, some of the options that are something you may, using your understanding of the steps you took before, you won't use them blindly, right? You'll use and decide and pick and choose, but it's certainly going to give you a really, really good analysis of that page. So yes, it does the analysis part of the page, as well as then break that down for you. And I would say if you really want to make it explode, you combine the research with it. If you really want to make it explode, you run the benefit document that it bought, that, for example, that we gave and Jason created before, and with the page, and then or just take the data from some of those things from the research, or from let's take one more example from the benefit bot, that even though this will give you a full benefit, but I like the way Jason's takes it from a different angle. So they both give you different data, but he breaks it up based upon all the different ways you can dimensionalize. And if you take that, you can then say, you know what, I love these three things, these three versions of the benefit from Jason's bot. Now I've got my overall analysis. I'm going to ask it to apply it to these 5 variables above the fold, and it will give you your answer. It will give you what you need to test. So yes and no, but I think you have the tools there to do it.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. Thank you for sticking around. And I have to run out of class, but we'll make the next class hopefully even better. So I appreciate everybody's time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Cheers, guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.